Hello viewers, the room froze the moment Brian K. said it. It wasn't a whisper, it wasn't accidental, it was a bold, deliberate declaration that seemed to slice through the air itself. Broke people cannot represent God. For a moment, no one even breathed. Then the phones came out. Within seconds, cameras zoomed in on his face. Within minutes, clips flew across Instagram and TikTok like sparks from a fire. And by sundown, the entire internet was engulfed in outrage, confusion, and disbelief. But what people didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that those 8 words were only the surface of a story far deeper, far older, and far more explosive than the viral moment suggested. Behind that statement was a lifetime of frustration, and a truth Brian K. had never publicly shared long before the world debated his theology, before the headlines framed him as either a bold truth-teller or a reckless provocateur. Brian K. was just a young preacher with a burning voice and an even hotter conviction. He came from humble beginnings, preaching in tiny sanctuaries where the paint peeled from the walls and hope hung in the air like incense. He wasn't polished then, but he was powerful. People said his sermons made them uncomfortable in all the right ways, forcing them to confront their complacency. Even as a teenager, he carried a spark that made older pastors whisper, "He has something." But that spark came with pressure. Everywhere he went, Brian saw leaders struggling not because they lacked faith, but because they lacked preparation. He watched ministries collapse under financial strain. He watched pastors burn out, not from spiritual weakness, but from practical chaos. He saw families lose churches, communities lose guidance, and dreams fall apart, not because God didn't call someone, but because life demanded more than passion alone. These early experiences planted something deep inside him, something that would later explode on the world stage. But behind the spotlight, the truth was far darker. As his influence grew, so did the expectations. His sermons became events. His name traveled across states. He gained followers, critics, and a reputation for saying the kind of things most leaders were too afraid to voice. He believed that ministry was not just spiritual, it was strategic. To him, representing God required discipline, vision, and readiness. But the more he spoke this message privately, the more he noticed a troubling pattern publicly. People wanted miracles without maturity, calling without accountability, purpose without preparation. And this was only the beginning of the heartbreak. By the time he stood on that stage on the day that would change everything, Brian was carrying years of silent frustration. According to insiders, he had spent months traveling to churches where leaders were drowning in debt. He had counseled pastors who were overwhelmed by responsibilities they were never trained to handle. He had watched promising ministries crumble because no one taught their leaders how to manage resources or build responsibly. And when he stepped into the pulpit that Sunday morning, something in him had reached its breaking point. He had no idea everything was about to change. Broke people cannot represent God. The sentence landed like an earthquake. Some listeners gasped. Others stiffened in their seats. A few nodded slowly, as though he had voiced what they had always believed but never dared to say. But the vast majority were stunned. It wasn't the theology, it was the tone. The bluntness. The audacity. And as the clip hit the internet, the backlash erupted like wildfire. Pastors condemned him. Commentators dissected him. Strangers cursed him. Hashtags trended. And yet, behind the noise, something even more intense was unfolding behind closed doors. What most people didn't know is that the sermon wasn't planned. Not that line. Not that moment. Insiders say it came from a deep, emotionally charged conversation he had the night before with a group of leaders who confessed they felt unprepared, overwhelmed, and ashamed of the pressure ministry placed on their lives. That conversation shook him. It reminded him of all the young leaders he'd seen fail simply because no one taught them how to survive. So when he got on stage, the filter dropped. His frustration became a roar. And the world heard it before he even realized what he had unleashed. But no one knew what was coming next. The controversy didn't break him. It cornered him. Within days, he was invited to a live debate with major pastors, a moment the faith world treated like a heavyweight fight. The tension was thick enough to cut. As the cameras rolled and critics fired questions, Brian remained unnervingly calm. He explained that his words weren't meant to shame the poor. They were meant to challenge leaders to be prepared, practically, emotionally, and spiritually. He spoke about ministries that collapsed because their leaders were drowning in personal chaos. He revealed the private moments of mentorship he had never shared publicly. And slowly, the room shifted. Not everyone agreed, but many finally understood. Still, the battle wasn't over. Days later, a prominent influencer reignited the controversy, accusing Brian of elitism and spiritual arrogance. The clip went viral again, and this time the pressure hit him harder. Sources say he barely slept. He filled notebooks with reflections. He replayed the sermon repeatedly, examining every word. And then something surprising happened. Instead of retreating, he decided to teach. He gathered a group of young pastors in a private room and gave the most vulnerable talk of his career. He told them about the leaders he had buried, the churches he had watched close, the dreams he had seen collapse because passion alone was never enough. He told them that representing God isn't about being wealthy, it's about being stable, about being ready, about being disciplined enough to carry the weight of influence without crumbling under it. And for the first time, as he looked around that room, he saw understanding instead of offense. This wasn't condemnation. It was tough love, born from wounds no one ever saw. Outside, the world kept arguing. But inside, something profound was happening. Young leaders began rethinking their approach to calling. Older pastors began questioning their preparedness. And slowly, the narrative shifted from outrage to reflection. Brian hadn't meant to start a movement, but he did. He forced the church to confront a painful question: is passion enough to lead? Or does representing God require readiness far deeper than most people ever admit? In the end, the scandal didn't destroy him. It clarified him. It pushed him to define, publicly and privately, what he had spent his whole life trying to teach. People may remember the statement. They may remember the outrage. But those who truly listened understood that beneath the controversy was a message about excellence, responsibility, and the weight of spiritual influence.